What's up, sons? It's Blind Run with Son of a Tech, and this is going to be a little bit of a different video today. We're going to take a look at a game. It's called Space Hulk Deathwing, and we're going to be checking out what the performance is like on PC. To start things off, the test bench is actually going to not be a test bench. It's going to be my main rig, which is an i7 6700K with 32 gigabytes of DDR4, and that's clocked at like 2800 megahertz. It's the Trident Z. I will definitely put links to all these parts in the description below. The 6700K is overclocked to 4.6 gigahertz at 1.35 volts, and that's cooled by an H110i GT. And then we have the graphics card. The big daddy is going to be the NVIDIA Titan X, and that is from the Pascal line, so it's the latest Titan X currently out. It's all powered by a Corsair AX860i. That's the only thing that is the same between my test bench and my main rig. I really like that power supply. And then I have a OCZ RD400 NVMe drive, and that's 256 gigabytes. The OS runs on that, and then all my games just run on either a 1 terabyte solid state drive, and I also have a 4 terabyte let's see, I think it's a Seagate. It's been a while. I've kept that one around a long time. I just like to load all of my Steam apps on there. It's like my Steam library backup drive, essentially, is what it is. So we picked up Space Hulk Deathwing, and I was looking forward to it. I've always been intrigued by the Warhammer 40k universe. It's not something I ever really got into per se. It's something that I was around a lot because I played a lot of Magic the Gathering. A way I've gotten into that kind of universe and picked up some of the lore is through things like video games. Unfortunately, it seems like publishers pick up the license for these games and then push them out too quickly. Now, is that the case for Space Hulk? So we had to jump in and start playing to get a feel for it, and of course I checked out the discussion thread before I did because I was currently at work when it released, because it had a noon release time on a Wednesday, which to me is already kind of a red flag because that's releasing it at a time in the States when everybody's at work. Now, that wasn't the case for their French release, or the France release, which is going to be on the 19th, which should be here in about 4 days. I'm hoping we're also going to be seeing a patch, because here's the problem. The game is pretty much broken performance-wise. We'll also talk about some other issues here too, but you are not going to be able to play this game on anything but high-end equipment at this point, and even then it's going to have issues. So that's the reason I did clarify the exact parts for running on this build. To get to the actual point where I benchmark, there's two sections. One's going to be outside of like what is considered or called horde mode, or what is being referred to as that, which is a section in the game that you get to which is like a last stand, and you will pretty much, it'll be like you and your 3 partners, whether they're AI or this game does have co-op, which is super intriguing. You'll have a final standoff and you'll be getting shot at, or you'll be getting thrown enemies at you over and over at a high rate. When these sections happen, huge frame losses happen alongside of it. So the first benchmark I'm going to show you guys here is actually the out of horde mode and in that kind of horde mode stance. And what I had done is it takes about an hour to get to that first standoff, and it's at the very end of the first level. So during that time, I was getting plenty of enemies spawning and coming at me down hallways and such, and I tweaked the settings until I could get it playable on my system. Starting out at 4K, I just wasn't able to. And that's outside of the horde. That's just kind of like in general terms. I wasn't able to hit 60 FPS, which is what I feel is like playable, especially on a Titan Pascal. And we go ahead and drop down to 1440p. So now we're at 1440p, and as you guys can see here in the charts, we had a minimum FPS of 59 with an average of 60 and a max of 61. Now the reason these numbers are so close together is because I was playing this game with VSync enabled. That's because I prefer to have VSync enabled when I'm sitting back on my couch, and when I moved up and was like, I better start benchmarking I better start benchmarking this, I just left VSync on because you guys are going to still see the issue here. As you can see, if we bump it into horde mode, we drop down to 33 FPS on the min with an average of 51.8 and a max of 61. I decided at this point I need to turn the game down to 1080p, right? Because I'll just go ahead and see if I can take a hit on resolution, and yeah, it'll kind of suck, but you know, whatever. I can up-res it with the television or do something later on down the line. So the goal was to get it closer to that 60 FPS. Well, take a look here and you will see that with 1080p during that horde mode in that same section, I had a minimum FPS of 38 with an average of 50.7 and a max of 61 FPS. Now, to try to figure out what was causing it, I of course pulled up my performance monitor and started taking a look at usage on the GPU as well as the CPU and memory. Now I have plenty of memory, I wasn't hitting the cap on that at all, and it seemed like it was still running at like the average kind of 8 gigabytes, 6 to 8 gigabytes. It wasn't going over too bad. The things that started to pop out was mainly the CPU usage. Now during these horde modes, it's generating a lot of enemies, and I assume that it's using some sort of possibly kind of random generator depending on the difficulty and so on and so forth. And whenever this happens, you would expect at least a bump in CPU usage, which is not actually what's going on. And so I think that the game isn't optimized, and this is just an assumption at this point, but also from kind of the discussion in the threads, this game doesn't appear to be optimized to utilize all the cores or even utilize the threads appropriately individually. And this is why the game doesn't really have issues when you're on a predetermined kind of route within the rest of the game where it seems to run fine. So if you played the game and you enjoyed it, but you didn't actually get to the end of the first level and do the horde mode, and you go into comments and you're like, why are people all shitting on this? I thought the game was fun. It's because you haven't made it to that point yet. Now, here's the thing. The reason I'm a little late in doing this video is because I wanted to go back in and do the 1080p horde. But this is where we start getting into some of the other downsides and issues with the game. So the game does work off of some sort of checkpoint system, but this checkpoint system is very few and far between. There's also no manual There is no manual save, however there is a manual load, which is kind of weird. It's almost like they didn't put the save option in, even though there is that capability, and the game is drawn out so much in the middle of the levels that it would be very advantageous. Now, that's a minor complaint, right? Okay. So we have the performance and we have the issue of the saves. The next issue here is that we have a problem with the controller support. Now the game doesn't say it has controller support, and that's fine, and that's fair to go ahead and release the game and say that it doesn't have controller support. But when you go into the options menu, you notice that there is a grayed out option for gamepad. So of course I went ahead and hooked up my Xbox One remote to see if I could use it. Well, it does work, which is good, but there's no mappings. It's still going to do the cues for mouse and keyboard, so you're not going to see like press X to reload, for example, on any of the prompts, or press A to open doors, etc., etc. Now, what this tells me is that since there is grayed out and it has some sort of kind of a little bit of controller support, but it says it doesn't, it tells me that the game wasn't complete. And that's where we can go ahead and draw a conclusion that the game wasn't complete. That's why we're seeing these performance issues, and that's why we're seeing some other issues within the game. I've kind of played it a lot. I only picked it up yesterday, and I have about 3 or 4 hours into it. Of course, I played the first level twice, which is 2 hours essentially, and that was to get the benchmark for the 1080p in that horde mode section. So I had another hour after that, and I started playing the second level, and there is some more frame rate variance with the average enemies coming at you, but nothing like too hard hitting you or taking the Titan X at 1440p below 50 FPS. But once I got to the next horde section, it took a shit again, and this time a little bit worse, and I didn't actually benchmark it, but I can tell you it started to bring down the Titan itself to into high 20s. So it's broke, and I'm sad it's broken. I hope they fix it by the 19th, but you guys need to know that, and I figured the best way I could show you was by showing you on the absolute best system I currently have available to me. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below, and ding that bell, and I will see you next Tuesday.